We're going to keep tonight's presentation very Christian-based, focused on our biblical teachings, our Catholic teachings. And so I'd like to start tonight with a gospel reading from Luke's Gospel. Let's place ourselves in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him into Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, where he was in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Interesting minute of reflection on this Gospel reading. The rich man is not named. I think that is very intentional, and the poor man is Lazarus. The rich man's sin, or the rich man's problem in this, is not that he did anything wrong. It doesn't say that he kicked Lazarus as he left his house, or did anything bad to him, or there was anything wrong. The problem was he didn't see. Lazarus was right there on the doorstep, and he did not see him. He stepped over him as he came and went from his place. Tonight I'd like to suggest that Lazarus is at our doorstep. And Lazarus is at our southern border, and Lazarus is all around us. And as pastor, as Christian, I want to help us see that. To see the people that are right there in front of us. This is the kind of gospel that keeps me awake at night. And I think, oh my gosh, am I seeing what I'm supposed to see? So tonight, hopefully, we will see a little more clearly. As I said, our presentation is focused on Catholic teaching, and so there are 2 main themes, or 2 main tenets on immigration that are found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. First, people have the right to migrate when they are in need. Second one, nations have a right to limit the number of people immigrating based on their resources. 2 very important tenets that we can't forget. I'd like to draw a line to that, draw attention to those last 3 words of number 2, based on their resources. Okay, that was 4 words. Based on their resources. Are we able to do more? Why should we care? These are a couple of quotes from Pope Francis. "Migrants and refugees are not pawns on a chessboard of humanity. They are children, women, men, who leave or are forced to leave their homes for various reasons, who share a legitimate desire for knowing and having, but above all, for being more." Faced with the tragedy of tens of thousands of refugees who flee death from war and hunger, and who have begun a journey moved by hope and survival, the gospel calls us to be neighbors of the smallest and the abandoned, and to give them concrete hope. Pope Francis. And finally, a statement from the United States Catholic Camp Conference of Catholic Bishops. The Catholic Church's work of assisting immigrants stems from the belief that every person is created in God's image and all are deserving of human dignity. Very, very foundational of our faith. We have to take into account human dignity in all of the issues that we face, whether that's immigration or abortion or mass incarceration or jobs, anything, education. It all has to go back to that human dignity. I'd like to move, we're moving on now to the border. I'll kind of step us through the week. Went down to Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico with Father John McCaslin and Father Todd Goodson. We went because there's a lot of stuff in the news about this. And every news station seems to present for influence, to present for a particular understanding or political opinion or to influence in a certain way. And so we really wanted to go down and just kind of see for ourselves, talk to the people, find out firsthand from the folks that are working at the border. What is the situation? Is it really what is being reported? And so here are a few pictures. The first thing that struck us with it is that it's a very militarized presence. You can see in the picture down here in the bottom left, gates and razor wire and turnstiles with guards on either side, and it's a very militarized feeling. When we would we stayed in Nogales, Arizona, and we would walk across the border every morning, and nearly every morning there was a large number of Customs and Border Patrol agents doing their morning exercises or their routines, and it looked very military. They were marching in order, they were dressed in their paramilitary garb. It was very regimented and militarized. This sign, cattle guard ahead, kind of struck us as an affront. If we are basing everything on human dignity, is a cattle guard sign really needed? I mean, I don't think there's any cattle drives running across the border at this time, and probably haven't for at least a few weeks or a few decades. But it's right there. Don't know if it's intentional or if we're just a little sensitive to that, but that struck us as being a little bit crass. The Kino Border Initiative is the facility here on the left picture, and some of you may remember Sister Tracy Haran. She is a Sister of Providence from Terre Haute, graduate of Roncalli High School. She is working down there. She's been down there for I think 2.5 to 3 years now, I think about 3 years. And she works on both sides of the border. So Kino has a center on the Arizona side right near the border, and then also the Mexico side. They provide legal assistance, they provide food, shelter for some people. Right now their shelter is pretty much closed because of COVID, and their volunteer base dropped from like 200 volunteers a week down to almost nothing. And so it's really hard for them to run a shelter because there's just no volunteers. There was one lady with 2 children staying there because they were in a particularly precarious situation. It was a single mom and she had 2 little kids. Josue was 6 and her sister, Lady, was 7. And Lady was special needs. And so they were staying there until legal aid could try and find a legal way for them to come north through an asylum claim. So they were helping them get everything in order. I never heard the exact story why they were there. I understood that they lost everything in the hurricanes in Guatemala, but I don't know what other additional threats they were facing. And so they were staying in the shelter, but everybody else staying in other shelters around Nogales. Another picture, the center is very welcoming and warm. It's a fairly new building that they've renovated over the last 2 or 3 years to house their function. This picture was particularly poignant on the wall of their cafeteria, the main gathering room. Obviously, a takeoff of the Last Supper. And the people pictured in the Last Supper are people who were known to the community, people who were living there on the border, volunteers and whatnot. The gentleman here on the end, holding the baby, is the priest who started Kino, or was the organizer back in the day. And so I forget his name, but he's recognized by everybody there. The two little boys hugging each other at the bottom, again, known by the people. This person begging for food, again, a known person in the community. And so very poignant picture there. And it was painted by one of the migrants who were coming through. It must have been there for quite some time. And so the talents were used. Lots of unwieldy pots. Here's Father John and Father Todd back in the kitchen doing dishes. That seemed like the main activity that we did. Every day they had 200 people come through for food. If it was your first time arriving at Kino, you would go through an intake interview. You would get to talk to a social worker, an intake person. You would tell them what your situation is, what your needs were, whether you were being deported. Maybe a lot of people had tried to cross and got stopped and returned, and so they would be being deported back to Nogales. Others were arriving for the first time and preparing to go across, and so they would hear the stories. If they had an asylum claim, if there was one of the 5 reasons that they were being persecuted, their lawyers would help them get the paperwork in order, accompany them to the border, to the Border Patrol agents to apply or appeal for asylum and then get a hearing. And so food was a big part of it. We helped clean dishes a lot of the week. Let's go ahead and meet some of the people that we met. As we worked there, we were in clerics because we wanted to be known as priests in case somebody wanted to hear a confession or something like that. And so we purposely went in clerics to be seen. It also made it pretty easy to approach people, fairly non-threatening, and we could ask maybe a little more boldly, well, tell me about your situation, tell me what's going on, what brings you to this place. First people I'd like to introduce you to is Marlena and Freeman. Marlena is from Guatemala. She lost everything. There were 2 major hurricanes that went through Central America in 2020. And in addition to COVID, it just collapsed the economy. In Guatemala especially, there are a lot of places that are very dependent on tourism. People travel to Guatemala to study languages. There's a lot of tourist destinations. With COVID, that completely shut down. And then with the hurricanes coming through as well, they lost a lot of things. She had a home on the river in Guatemala, and the river rose and washed everything away. So she lost everything, had no way to support her son, had no other means of doing anything. And so she decided to come north to try and get to the U.S. for economic reasons. She was talking with one of the social workers and trying to figure out if there was an asylum claim. They thought she might have a case. It was going to be a little bit of a tenuous case, but she decided to try and cross the border anyway. And so they were talking to her. They could never give her advice, I guess, or force her to do anything, but they suggested strongly that she try and go through one of the legal channels. She didn't want to try that, and so she was going to go with a coyote, which is a person that would traffic her across the border. He convinced her that it was about a 4-hour journey across the desert. The people that are in the know say it's more like 4 days. This is what she's wearing. She did have a backpack on, and before she left, she asked for a blanket, just in case it got cold at night. It is very cold. I tried to sleep with the window open. I had to shut it. It was that cold. And so every night I was there, I just kept thinking about Marlene and Freeman. Where are they? Out in the desert somewhere, freezing, hopefully not to death. But a 4-day journey. And they intentionally go to places where it's a long crossing because there's less border patrol agents or whatnot. And so it's easier to cross in certain areas. Her hope is to get to the U.S., and she had some family somewhere that she was going to try and hook up with there. But I mentioned the coyotes. You have to cross with a coyote. A coyote is a person, and we got mixed reviews on whether coyotes were good or bad. It sounds like a terrible term, but several people said their coyotes were actually really good. that they would help them out. They would give them food, they would give them clothing to try and make it as safe of a crossing as they could. Others, you hear that they abandon them, or they extort them and they get them across and then demand more money, or kidnap them and call their friends and family for extortion money. But you have to cross with a coyote, and the mafia or the gangs control all that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. I'd like to show a video here. This is a young man that I met. He is a fairly successful young man, mid-20s. He grew up in an orphanage in Honduras, was trained as a mechanic, had a mechanic shop, raised money and bought a moto taxi. So he was doing everything that he could for his family. He was married with a 2-year-old daughter. Again, with the hurricanes and COVID, the economy collapsed and he could not support his family. So let me show you this. If you speak Spanish, you'll be at an advantage, but I'll tell you what he's saying.
Soy de una aldea de Guatemala, soy mecánico de motos. Me formé en joven en un taller popular de 1 año todos los fines de semana. Cuando terminé el curso, empecé a emprender porque veía que no había trabajo. Entonces fue donde nace mi idea de poner un taller de motos, y gracias a Dios ha sido excelente. Me va muy bien, he tenido un cambio espectacular. Pero aparte de mi trabajo, tengo un empleado, con las ganancias de mi taller puedo tener una mototaxi, y eso me hace sentir muy orgulloso porque aparte de mi emprendimiento, de que me va muy bien, estoy generando empleo. Yo le digo a los jóvenes que intenten emprender, que no se queden atrás, deben ver ese espacio donde hace falta algo y actuar.
Entitled Successful Youth, Jóvenes Exitosos. And so it's highlighting him as one of the success stories of this school. Growing up in an orphanage, makes good, studies hard, does what's right, stays away from the gangs and the drugs and everything else, and he can't make it. He can't survive in Honduras. For the previous year of COVID, he had to borrow money from a little cooperative in the village. So he had a $15,000 debt that he had to pay back at 10% interest per month. $1,500 a month just in interest. And then he was paying a coyote to get north. It was $9,000 to get from Honduras to the border, and an additional $3,000 to get across the border. So $12,000 additional. So this young man is sitting at $27,000 debt, no job, no way to survive. And so he makes the heart-wrenching decision to come north. And I say heart-wrenching because he was one of the ones that asked to talk to a priest. And so his first attempt at crossing the border was unsuccessful. He was stopped by a border control agent. And because of Title 42, we'll mention that in a minute, he was not given the opportunity to apply for asylum. And so he was returned back to the border. He was pretty desperate when he got there, and so he talked to the intake person. He gave his story. They gave him a meal, and so as he was eating his meal, he asked, the intake person said he wants to talk to a priest, and so I went down and sat down and talked with him, Nerlin. And he was obviously just a little bit anxious. And so we were just having a small chat, and he told me he's married, he's got a 2-year-old daughter at home, and but there's this tension in his voice, and so after he finishes his meal, so why don't we go back to the chapel? There was a nice chapel off to the side, and so we walked back there. When he got into the chapel, he collapsed on the floor, sobbing. It was just inconsolable for 2 or 3 minutes. It was just bawling. And I, put my hand on his back, I was rubbing it, and said he just missed terribly his daughter. His daughter was going to turn 2, and he couldn't be with her. He was afraid, he was scared, but he was going to go to Seattle. He had some friends up there, and he was going to work for 3 years, pay off his debt, raise some money, build a house in Honduras, and return. And he couldn't wait to get across to get it started. But he was stopped the first time. And so I said, what are you going to do? He said he doesn't have a choice. He has to go across. $27,000 debt. If he goes back to Honduras, you know, the people that he owes money to are going to want it back. And if he doesn't, sorry, my producer is telling me I get my camera back. So he was really in dire straits. He did not want to emigrate. His dream in life would be to continue with his mechanic's job and to just continue with life, do the right thing, raise money, build a life for his daughter, and continue doing what he could. But that wasn't an option for him. So I have his Honduran phone number. I've tried it a couple times and it didn't answer, so I'm going to continue hoping to get a hold of him to find out where he is, if he ever made it across, if he made it to Seattle. Walter and Maria. Walter and Maria from Guatemala, and they lost everything due to the hurricanes and no jobs due to COVID. So you can see they're young. They crossed the border on foot, requested asylum. The Border Patrol agents denied the request. They were expedited or deported quickly back to the border. They decided they weren't going to try it again. They didn't have anything to go back to, but the fear of going north was too great. They wouldn't say what happened on the way north, but it must have been enough to scare them that it wasn't worth the risk again, possibly because of their young daughters, want to put their family at risk. So I ran into them the next day at the bus station. Here they are, getting ready to get back on the bus to Guatemala. Hopes dashed. Who knows what they would find when they get back. They had to borrow money from family and friends to get to the border. So now they've got the additional pressure. What happens? How do you pay back thousands of dollars to people when there's no jobs? This is Natalia, who is 7. She's a little girl, and Antonia is her mom. They're from Ojotenango, Guatemala. And very similar story. No way to support their family. The tragedy in this one is that Antonia had 3 older children. She has 4 children. She made the decision to leave the 3 older children with her sister and only travel north with the little one, Natalia. She was very emotional when I first met her. She also crossed through the desert, was stopped by the Border Patrol, requested asylum, and again was denied hearing. She, by law, should have been given a hearing because she's a single mother traveling with a child. As asylum law, you're supposed to be given that. But there's something called Title 42, which was enacted. It was enacted a number of years ago to control against the spread of disease. And so the government is using Title 42 now because of COVID to expressly deport people instead of allowing the proper channel of applying for asylum. So people who would have a legitimate claim are not being given the chance. And the United States is a signature to the UN's refugee and asylum policies and writers of them, but we're not following those policies using COVID as the excuse. Is it a real excuse? Maybe. Maybe back when it was flaring up and there were a lot of COVID cases, perhaps there was some legitimacy to that. But I think compassion has to override. She would not talk about what happened. Obviously, something very traumatic happened on the way up because she was not willing to try a second time. She said, you probably have an asylum case. Talk to our attorneys. We'll get the paperwork ready for you. You'll go back with some asylum controls or protections, she would have nothing of it. She would not listen. All she wanted to do was get back to Guatemala as fast as she could. So the travel across was obviously very, very traumatic for her. Pray that Natalia was okay. Jose and Antonia and 6 others, there was a group of 8 of them traveling together. This was a story that we had to hear about 3 times to make sure we were hearing it properly and getting all the details of it. They were originally from Guerrero, Mexico, which is in the very far southern part of Mexico. They owned land, they had a herd of cows, they had crops on their property. Life was decent. I mean, they were surviving, doing well. The gangs in Guerrero were threatening them, wanting them to join their forces. They had some younger sons, teenagers, and they refused. They did not want to become part of the gang life. And so Antonia's uncle was murdered by the gangs, and they were threatening them with murder. And so they stole their land. The gangs came in and kicked them off the land. If they would have stayed, they would have been murdered. And so they fled for their lives off of their own property that they legally owned, and they fled to Monterrey, Mexico. They got a bus to Monterrey, and they get to Monterrey, and the gangs get on the bus and start pulling people off. And so they are forced off the bus at gunpoint. The gangs are threatening them, and Antonia said that the police came. She said, "That's great, finally, the police are going to step in and they're going to help us here." The police took her husband away and beat the heck out of him and told him to get out of Monterrey. The police were in cahoots with the gangs of the mafia. And so they did. They ran, they went to Tijuana, Mexico. They kind of reestablished themselves in Tijuana. They got jobs, they settled down, things were fairly stable. Jose was on the streets working one day or whatever, walking, and somebody from one of the gangs recognized him and ran him over in a car. He spent almost a year in the hospital recovering. He still walked with great difficulty. They escaped that and came to the border right about the time that COVID hit. So they came to Nogales seeking asylum. If anybody doesn't have a case, if anybody has a case, it's them. They are persecuted. They're being chased all the way across Mexico by the gangs. They get to Mexico, they get to Nogales, like I said, right at the beginning of COVID, and the border shuts down. And the remain in Mexico policy, they had to stay in Nogales. They have been in Nogales for 17 months, living in a shelter with 8 people. So it was Jose and Antonia, a couple of sons, a mother-in-law, a granddaughter. So 8 of them traveling together. The good news is it looks like they have a case, and they're going to get to cross and come north with an asylum case. That remain in Mexico policy has been lifted, and so people who have cases can stay in the U.S. while they await their case. And after they come to the U.S. for a certain amount of time, it's currently a year, but now I think it's dropping into 3 months, they can apply for work permits and they can start establishing themselves a little bit, awaiting their asylum hearing in immigration court. I'm not sure what's happening on my screen. Oh, you're not seeing it. There's all sorts of scribbles on my screen. I think it's Scotty. But the perseverance to continue there, it was just incredible. 17 months living in a shelter, and the shelters are overcrowded. There's about 150 to 170 people living in these shelters, men, women, and children. We visited 2 of them at very confined spaces. The one they were staying at, there was no outdoor greenery space for the kids. And what they would do all day is they'd sit in the chapel because that was the biggest space that they had. For 17 months. The border towns are very, very dangerous, so they're living in fear that the gangs will recognize them again, and the gangs control the borders. So if they are out, if there's new people in town, the gangs know it. And if you're in the wrong place, they can make you know that you're not welcome. And sometimes that means you don't see the light of the next day. So living on the border for 17 months was tremendously dangerous for them and for the other immigrants. So this is a couple of pictures of the border wall. City divided. Nogales was one large city. Back in 1909 was the first barbed wire fence that was constructed across the city, dividing them. Under the policy, good fences make good neighbors, and it was more of a way to just control cattle going back and forth. It was not about immigration back then. In the 1940s, the chain link fence was constructed in the 1990s. This more permanent structure, probably about 20 feet tall, was built across the city. On the Mexican side, they do their best. It's probably not with all authenticity. They're not trying to make it beautiful, but it's political as well. There are a lot of things written on the walls. There's artwork, there's sayings. Pictures of people who have died along the walls. There's a group that will make a cross and place it up next to the wall so people can see reminders of how dangerous it can be. And some more artwork. At the bottom, nuestros sueños no los detiene. Our dreams cannot be detained, or how would that be, right? Nuestros sueños no los detiene is what it says there. Our dreams cannot be contained, or our dreams cannot be captured, written on the wall. It's pretty formidable. It's, like I said, 20 feet tall. On the Mexican side, we have this kind of stuff. On the U.S. side, there's razor wire and a large span on the other side. So getting across the wall would just be the start of the problems, and getting beyond there, we've got just more danger. Some of the reasons. So what are the reasons that most people, in our experience of talking to folks, the first was the violent gangs. And the gangs were violent if you didn't want to play their game. If you didn't want to join them, if you were a young man or a young family and you didn't want to be part of that, then you were against them. So they were a threat. And so they would take your land, they would kill your family, they would do anything to get you to join. It was amazing how powerful the gangs were. They talked about the mafia just running the country. And a lot of times the police, the government is in cahoots with the gang. And it seems nearly impossible to defeat. It's not this little street gangs on south side of Chicago are probably like kids games compared to these. They run the border. If you're not part of that and you try and cross, you won't make it. The second main reason was hurricanes. Like I said, in 2020, there were two major hurricanes that went through Honduras and Guatemala, Central America. On top of COVID, it just collapsed the economy. There were no jobs. Even people who had legitimate businesses and thriving before just collapsed, and there was no way to survive. COVID-19 was another push. Again, no jobs. Any tourism-based industry collapsed. Abject poverty, people just have no other options. That's a push. A couple of the polls that are polling people in the U.S. is the availability of jobs. Most of the people we met had some family in the United States. And so jobs are available. Construction, landscaping, meat processing are some of the larger ones. But there are jobs available and people are willing to hire under the table or whatever. The other one was safety, opportunity, just effective law enforcement. Living under threat that even if you have a problem with your neighbor, you don't call the police because the police may be a bigger problem. And so knowing that the United States is a law-abiding country, and if you have a problem, there's reasonable ways to settle that, and you can call the police and trust that they're going to have your interest in mind. And so most of the people dream of some kind of a secure life where they can work hard, get ahead, not be taken advantage of. Some of the U.S. policies are making the situation worse. The militarization of the border increases gang violence. Again, we're kind of slow on the uptake, so they had to explain this to us a couple of times. But they said back when the borders were more porous and people were traveling back and forth, the gangs didn't really have any problem, didn't have any authority, because it wasn't hard, and you didn't need help to get across the border. Once the borders become militarized and it becomes much more difficult, they had to up their game to get people across. And so they became more violent, they became more controlling. They could extort the people trying to get more north more forcefully. Kidnappings were a very common thing, where people would be kidnapped and held for ransom until they would call your family and say, we've got your daughter, we need $5,000 or we're going to kill her. So people would pay. So it's very lucrative. Sister Tracy told a story that happened just a week before we got there. She had helped a lady get across from Kino, and the coyotes were taking her to Florida, and so they would get this lady across the border and then over to Florida where she would meet with her family. She got somewhere, she wasn't exactly sure where, and was kidnapped by the coyotes. They started extorting her family and saying, we need, I forget how much it was, $5,000 or $8,000, or she's going to be killed. This lady didn't know where she was. She was in the U.S., she didn't speak English, she was completely lost. She still had WhatsApp control on her phone, and so she was texting back to Sister Tracy saying, I'm in trouble. And so Sister Tracy's trying to figure out how to get this person help. Somebody thought, well, they could send a ping to her phone. And so they pinged her phone, and they found out where she was in Florida. And so Sister Tracy called the police in that area and said, there's a lady that's being held against her will, and she's at this marker address or whatever. And so the police went and showed up at the house, and they called back to Sister Tracy and said, well, yeah, we found her, but she's fine. Well, are you sure she's fine? Well, yeah, she told us she's fine. Well, she's standing in front of her captors, of course she's going to say she's fine. She said, okay, put her on the phone. And so she started talking Spanish with her, and there was an interpreter with the police, and Sister said, are you okay? And she said, no. But she said it in Spanish, so her captors or whoever couldn't tell. And she said, do you need help to get out of this? And the lady indicated yes. And so the sheriff who was on the phone said, okay, now we see what's really going on. And it turned into a criminal investigation. And so the lady got help and was rescued thanks to Sister Tracy and the choir. Those stories were very common. It was happening on a fairly regular basis. That's the human trafficking increases when the militarization of the border. It becomes harder to get across, so you need a stronger force to help you. Abuse of the migrants without reprisals. The police again are in cahoots. One thing that was interesting, the gangs bring drugs north and guns south. There's very strict gun control in Mexico. It's very, very difficult to get a personal weapon in Mexico. And so the gangs who are heavily armed, it's all illegal guns that are coming south across the border. So, again, making the borders more difficult it ups the game, and people have to increase their forces. Title 42 expedited the deportations without due process, again, based on a fear of COVID, or that was what is being used. And so people are not getting the access to an asylum appeal. Migrant Protection Protocols is called the MPP, enacted in December of 2018. It was the Remain in Mexico policy. That puts the immigrants in danger because they're now living in these dangerous border cities, sometimes for as much as a year and 5 months, like Jose Antonia and her family. When former policy when you would be processed through asylum, if you had an asylum case past a credible fear hearing, which is where the normal process is you come across to appeal for asylum, you're given a credible fear hearing. And so you explain to a judge why your life is in danger. And if it's credible, then you're granted an asylum case. And then from there, you would await hearings and further trials and either permission to stay or deportation later. To remain in Mexico, if you were given a asylum case, you would have to remain in Mexico until your hearing came up, and that could be a long time. Because of COVID, a lot of the courts were shut down. Legal entry is nearly impossible. The borders are closed because of COVID, except for very special cases. Title 42 is being utilized for rapid deportations. The grounds for applying for asylum have been greatly reduced and requires proof of persecution based on one of 5 grounds, either on your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership to a particular social group. That's the only 5 ways that you can apply or be considered for asylum if your life is being threatened on those grounds. In June of 2018, they took away domestic violence and gang violence as legitimate causes. And I couldn't find a statistic specifically on this, but I had understood that that was about 80% of the asylum claims were based on gang violence and domestic violence. But those are no longer legitimate for asylum. So coming north legally is almost impossible, although hopefully things will get better in that area. These are some of the resources to learn more. Most of these are Catholic-based. So the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Justice for Immigrants is a full website. Lots of information available for parishes primarily. The Catholic Accompaniment Reflection Experience. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis and the Archdiocese of San Francisco are the 2 pilot programs in the country that are being funded by the USCCB in this CARE program. So we have a group here. Kathy Lampton and Karen are kind of heading that up for us. We're just in the nascent stage of that right now, trying to figure out what to do and how we can go forward with that program. Catholic Charities USA has a tremendous outreach to immigrants, refugees. Catholic Legal Immigration Network, or Clinic, again, for legal questions, is a great resource. And then the Kino Border Initiative. Their mission is education and trying to advocate for reform on immigration and just and workable immigration. And so on their website, they have a number of great resources for groups. They also offer immersion experiences for high school and college age people. So you can take a group down there and spend a week at the border. It's a combination of direct service and also education. So when things open up a little more, I think it'll be a tremendous experience to have folks to go down and have a similar experience on both sides of the border. What can we do? So one of the motivating factors of going down there was we were just compelled to do something. We hear these tragic stories, and being down there, I've seen it and heard it with my own eyes and ears. What could we do? And it just compels me that something can be done. Lazarus is at our doorstep, and something needs to be done. Part of it is to ask the Kino folks, is to discontinue the use of Title 42. To contact our senators and congressmen requesting that these deportations based on this be discontinued. That more and more with the vaccines, the protocols in place to protect against COVID, that should not be used as an excuse, but to adhere to the standard asylum policies that our country has set forth. And also increase the number of asylums. It's back up to 62,500. It was increased recently from a low of 15,000, I think. Sounds like a lot of people, but it's still very, very, very tiny percent based on our country. Push for humane, just, workable migration reform or immigration reform. Pathways to citizenship for dreamers, expedited court process, increase eligible asylum admissions, and more accessible temporary work visas. Our country needs workers. Ask any construction company owner, and it's hard to find employees. And so it's not that there's a lack of jobs. We need employees. It's a lack of legal access to that. And I think if we were able to allow that, we would decrease a lot of the problems on the border. We could make it not open, but more open for legitimate people who want to come and make a better life for themselves. Okay, I've been talking for quite a while, so Scotty's going to field some questions for us and open it up for some questions here as well. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, you can also sponsor somebody. My brother sponsored immigrants from Mexico years ago.
Sponsored, yes.
And my father was sponsored.
Okay.
And he met my mom.
Another thing that we can do is sponsor people. On Thursday, I'm having a conversation with Bethany Christian up in Indianapolis, and they are helping sponsor people. And so I'm talking about how we might be able to do that more as a community or as individuals. We did meet a couple people. One was going to Canby, Indiana. They had met a doctor and his wife in Mexico, formed a relationship with them. They sponsored them, so when they get across in their asylum claim, they need a sponsor, and they will move to Canby and be with this family, so husband and wife and 2 children. So I want to find out
that's
more.
That's a cattle guard, and that's why it was warning you.
Right.
Because if you run over a cattle guard really fast, you're going to break your ankle. You know,
Right.
Your livestock's going to break their ankles. You're tired, you're going to get flagged. So that's why they put the sign up. And that's
I understand.
humane.
Yes, sir.
Father, what would cause the people that call our crossing, what was the criteria they used to turn that?
You can, yeah.
Title 42 was the main reason, so they were turned away because of a fear of bringing in disease. And so people that come across that encounter a border patrol agent, very few were given a chance to make a claim, and so they would be returned saying, border's closed, nobody's being accepted across. So Title 42.
Tested for
Tested for COVID, that would be an idea. Yes.
well, and other diseases. They don't. It wasn't just COVID that stops them.
Right.
There's all kinds of things they're not vaccinated. Polio, mumps, measles.
But that was never an issue until COVID. Title 42 was not used until
It
was
wasn't even
years ago.
used during the AIDS epidemic.
1944 was the last time it was legalized. Enacted in 1944. Okay. What was going on then? Was that polio? Okay. Other questions? Yes.
To your knowledge, is there any coordination between the USCCB and Mexico's kind of what we call the bishops in Mexico? Is there any cross-border cross-pollination of ideas?
That's a good question. Is there any conversation between the bishops of Mexico and the bishops of the United States? I don't know. I assume there are. Given the Pope's strong charge and efforts on immigration and refugees, I would assume that there is high-level conversations like that. But I'm not aware of any. Good question. Yes.
You have an opportunity to already talk with families that are on the north side about their concerns about, like the man today or yesterday who found children, really small children in the desert, and how consuming that must be for people on the north side of the border to think, how can I help, or what can I do?
Right. We did a little bit. There were a few volunteers who came down from a 55 and over community near Tucson, and they would come down and work every week. And they said their community was very divided, that they were in a group that was sympathetic, and they came down to work, and there was another group that was very, very divided and hostile toward immigrants. And for those reasons, I think they're fearful of elevated crime rates or the myriad of issues that we hear about.
Well, there is another side to the the undocumented immigrant story, and that is the crime that comes across the border. And it is there, and it is real. And if you ask anybody that lives along the Texas border or the Mexico border, it's real. And
So,
it's scary.
the comment is that there's another side to that there is elevated crime risk at the border, elevated issues with whatnot, and that's not deniable. I mean, there are issues.
And we can't turn a blind eye to that. Just, it's a double-edged sword. Like you said, you got the military presence there, and that causes the gang violence to ramp up. But we just can't let everything go willy-nilly. So the only thing you have is border security and the National Guard.
There could be expedited process, and
And there could be common sense too, but it's the government.
speaking as a former governor and a government person, so it is a tremendously complex issue. Obviously,
Yes.
there's not a single issue, not a single way to fix it, or it would be done. So no argument there. But I think compassion, from a Christian standpoint, a Catholic standpoint, compassion has to be our leading voice in this. And there are multiple approaches to helping correct it, but a lot of those approaches are, decades long in the making. But what happens to Marlene and Freeman right now? Mark.
From your experience down there, Father, what was the biggest need of the group that you were working with them? Volunteer, funding, what did they need to support their efforts?
They were needing donations of clothing. And so they would, in their volunteer organizations, they were asking for jeans, men's jeans in particular. That was a big need for them. Funding for food. They have a very small budget for helping people pay for bus tickets or something like that. The one family that got returned to Guatemala, they did pay for their bus ticket back because they had no other resources. They were saying that was about the end of their month's availability for that kind of aid. So I think legal aid, they have a small group of volunteer lawyers that come down at different times and do consults with people.
You know, a charitable organization?
It is. It was started by 6 Catholic organizations, mainly Jesuits. And so yes, it's a nonprofit organization. I can put their website on our website, or a link to it anyway. They do some tremendous work. So, yes.
Father, does anybody, even once they cross the border, is there any organization that's helping them with the aspect of the formation of families? Right? Are they going to get any better off by being over here without having that formation of families? Right? Like, how do we, as a Catholic family, bring that into their lives? Because just bringing folks over and leaving them to themselves, are they really going to have a better life with some of the stuff going on in the U.S. anyway?
Right.
So how is that being addressed? For that need?
Either hooking up with family that's here or through your sponsor. And so churches and organizations will sponsor a family who has an asylum case. And so your role as a sponsor is to help them integrate, help them find housing and a community to surround them. And Catholic Charities up in Indianapolis is working a lot with the Bethany Christian to do just that. Bethany Christian works a lot with the unaccompanied minors. And so they will help sponsor the unaccompanied minors that come to Indianapolis. And so they were looking for emergency foster until they can contact another sponsor or family to send the children to be with the family.
I just think of those single moms, right? As a mom myself, you want to come over here to do better for your child, but then how do you, as a single mom, leave a 6-year-old to go work provide that, to provide the shelter, to provide that food. You know, it just, I feel like that's an area that we don't address very well.
6-year-old that doesn't speak the language.
Catholic Charities, again, there's a lot of groups like that, but the sponsor organizations, that's probably why we need more and more sponsor organizations that would help that would take people, provide that wraparound service. Yes?
I just wanted to say, there's actually a lot, I think there's that. If the process really hasn't changed, this logistics are different. I guess what I want to say is, take the village. You're right. You can't just lump somebody down. So that's why I think really having a supportive village is very important. It really brings people. Really can't do that as family church. So the church that sponsor our meetings that periodically, more so when I was just being called to that is really commitment. It's something that you're not really saving them, really sort of bringing them into anybody has a question you have to choose that. I heard myself, I think my family did that with me. Our family was very much for the revolving door. We sort of years to our family, and we sort of in contact with the community. We have random people store, like say, really family. So it's a gift that keeps us our community. So if we do it well and keep into it, then we can.
Thank you. As a product of the refugee or the asylum system, you can see the success in that, but it takes a huge commitment from people who are willing to do that for not just quick donation, but really all around services. That's really why it would take a whole community like a St. P's or Catholic Charities for education, work, housing, all those things.
And I'm not saying that you can't do it. That's what you're called to do. It's monetary donation. And I've got 3 months in the summer. I'm a teacher. I can money. Those are all welcome and encouraged. But I think, I guess my point is, it's a long-term commitment.
My brother sponsored family from Mexico since before I was 30. So over 10 years ago, and he's still invited to their.
So your brother sponsored somebody for over 10 years ago from Mexico, and they're still connected to them.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, they are invited to all the family get-togethers. I've been invited to family things, and but it's.
I'm wondering if anybody has reached out to any of the businesses, for example, I'm from Edinburgh, and I know I talked to some businesses there about the possibility of sponsoring the people who have been there working for 10 or 15 years. Oh. And would they not consider helping them to get a work permit?
Okay.
But they don't have that kind of thing at the moment.
So talking to the companies who employ people, would they be willing to sponsor them for a green card or for work permits, so they could regularize their status?
That would be admitting that they were hired.
Closed.
Because the businesses would have closed if they hadn't been there.
And all the factories have to say, needed here. Yes.
But they would be admitting that they hired illegally.
Yes.
I'm wondering about these words, militarization. Is a negative effect of this?
And that bothers me a little bit when I see tents, many, hundreds of people covered in blankets. And I mean, we're doing it. But what do we do? Why are we having a negative effect on this whole situation?
I think that would be a separate, so you're talking about like the refuge or the asylum camps where there's tents and people are being housed on the U.S. side of the border.
Yes.
That would not be the military side, not militarization, it would be the border, the actual border itself that has the wall and the razor wire and the armed guards.
What are you saying is the negative?
The negative is that makes the gangs become more violent.
But the border,
Yes.
buildings,
The militarization, when the wall gets fortified, for people to get across, they have to get stronger. And the gangs are the ones that have the most force. And so they become stronger to overcome this new barrier. And they become more forceful and extort people. It's kind of counterintuitive. It feels like if you build a solid wall, then people don't get across. But the push is so desperate that people are going to try and cross to any extent. And so if there is no border,
yeah, they get across where there is.
Right.
I've seen them going through the river, get my money, and we accept them,
but the thing is, but they're not being accepted. I mean, if they encounter a border patrol agent, most of the time now
they are our agents.
Yes. So it's the United States Border Patrol. And a lot of the migrants are kind of coached to turn yourself in. And so you come across and you say, I'm seeking asylum. And before that would work and they would be given an asylum hearing, that's not a guarantee they get to stay, because if they don't meet the criteria, they would still be deported. But in recent months and the last year, when they encounter Border Patrol, they're almost always deported immediately without given the chance to state their claim. Without asking why. You're being chased by gangs, you're being chased by whatever.
Military.
You're on the wrong political party. We met 2 Russians in Mexico. They made it to Cancun. They were both on the wrong political party in Russia, and it was easier to immigrate to Mexico through Cancun. They came on vacation and stayed. And they had been there for, I think, over a year. And they would be one of those 5 groups that were persecuted because of the wrong political party. And they were still struggling to get across because the borders are closed. There's no policy that will allow them to cross. So it does feel inhumane sometimes that it's not,
Dr. Chris, a couple observations from my experience in working with a subset of the Latino immigrant community. Number one, when we say dreamers, there are 1.2 billion young people in this country who generally fit in that category. 25% of them are not from Mexico or Central America. They're dreamers from Canada, and England, and Germany, as well as Africa, Southeast Asia. Sorry. 25% of the dreamers are not from Mexico and Central America, point number one. Point number two, to your observation about what happens when they get here and how do they kind of get their lives going. My observation has been that community-based organizations can be highly impactful there. The example we have in Columbus that I'm most familiar with is Su Casa Columbus, which serves a wide swath of the immigrant community, the Latino immigrant community coming into Columbus. It's non-denominational. They're run by a board of volunteers in the community. And they have multiple very effective programs that teach you everything from how to get a school bus for your children to get to school to how to get good health care in this community. So there's another opportunity for connections. And then on another point that was raised, I think by the woman sitting right in front of me, there are some employers in Columbus who actively are working on trying to get status for their immigrant employees. There are not many of them. It's very expensive, a very slow process, especially under today's immigration law. But that's happening right now in Columbus, and it can be expanded with the right type of advocacy from the right type of people. My favorites are, good-thinking Catholics, but that's biased. So to those 3 points, there are, I think, things happening right now. And so step number 1 is probably the easiest step. Find those local organizations and connect with them, right? Start working there. Step number 2 is to sort of take some of these new ideas that Father Chris is sharing with us, and start building from there. There's no better impact, in my opinion, in my experience, than starting washing the pots, like Father Chris said on Sunday, till your hands bleed. In other words, starting at the street level, working with those who are in greatest need, learning and doing again and again and again. That's a tremendous way to start. That's baked in to our philosophical grounding as Catholics, I believe. And it's an easy thing to get started with. You just have to commit a little bit.
Thank you. Are there questions from online? Yeah, there are. Do you want to come up and say into the mic so our folks online can hear?
I'll give you the easy ones first and then work our way through it.
All right.
Just a clarification. So these are folks on the slideshow that you met on the Mexican side of the border?
Yes, that's right. They were on the Mexican. Yes, these are all people that I met at the Kino site, and so they are on the Mexican side of the border. They have not crossed into the U.S. and been able to stay.
All right. The migrants coming in or trying to come into the country, are they generally aware to request asylum, or are they advised to request asylum as a more likely means of immigration to the U.S.?
They have been advised. It's fairly common understanding in Central America and Mexico that asylum is a possibility, especially for women and children. Single men are not. They typically don't apply for asylum unless there's another case against them. But if it's simply general persecution, it's usually women and children. And they are, again, it's just common knowledge among immigrants.
I'm going to read this one verbatim because it made me smile. And it's a couple questions, so just know that going into it. How do we stop human trafficking, drug flow, abuse from gangs without military or government presence at the border? How can we give everyone coming here due process when there are so many? What are the ways that we can help people seeking asylum without making the border crisis worse? If one of these questions was answered, just ignore my toddler was being loud.
All right, I like that. Very good questions. This is a tremendously complicated issue. How do we stop the gangs and the drugs? I think it starts in a couple ways. If we have effective drug programs here in the United States, so there's not a pull, and so we are the greatest consumers of drugs, and that's the reason they're selling them here. And so if we can stop the desire for drugs or lower it, that would help. There's probably a lot of other ways, but if we can take away the monetary gain of the gangs, that would be the way to do it. And that's, I don't know how you do that. Trafficking there's a need for trafficking to get across, and trying to cross the border again on your own would not be a possibility. Finding the routes, knowing how to do it, and so you need a guide. So as long as there are people trying to cross, there's going to be human trafficking. One of the big points I think would be very good to try and do is economic development in the countries. I am not in favor of immigration. I want people to stay in their home countries and raise their families safely and have opportunities there.
Right.
But that's not a possibility now, and the solution to that is probably years or decades in the making. And it comes from economic development, it comes from helping countries become more stable, trying to root out corruption, Guatemala and Honduras are horribly corrupt at a lot of levels. And so that's not our doing. But we might be able to help affect change there and stabilize the country. So people can find a way to make a living in their home country. I have two more for you. Did you witness anyone who actually got asylum? And if so, how did they do that? Yes, Jose and Antonia with the group of 8. Yes, they got asylum, and so they were given permission to cross, and they were going to cross in about a week. And so it was due to proving their credible fear. They were being persecuted, obviously, multiple times by this gang, was following them and knew where to find them, I suppose. And so their life was definitely in danger because of the gangs. So they were given asylum and would be going to, I think it was relatives in the U.S. So yes. And then this is the question in some form or variety that I got asked the most, and it's probably the most difficult to answer, which is why I'm asking the question and not answering the question. I'm glad you have to do that. What can we do as individuals or as a collective or as a parish to help improve the overall situation of those at the border? Good question. I think becoming educated. The Kino Border Initiative, one of their biggest things is education. And so teaching people what's truly happening. Again, a lot of the news that we get is slanted in one direction or another, and so it's hard to understand what the truth is. So becoming educated, getting involved in organizations that if you're feeling passionate or feeling called to do something to help people, get involved in one of these organizations that already do that. I don't think it's necessary to start a different organization. There's lots of groups out there, Catholic Charities and Kino and Sukasta, Columbus, and a lot. So getting involved in those. Perhaps, volunteering for the CARE program here at the parish. And that's an accompaniment program for people that are here. But there's a lot of people who have asylum cases that are still awaiting their courts. They're having issues and struggles. And so volunteering, helping those groups, just becoming involved, saying something, maybe calling our congressmen and our senators and saying, we want just immigration reform or stop using Title 42, something like that. So becoming active. Good questions. Karen.
We have a real case right now that I want to share. I'm sorry because you can translate. I'm seeing many people asking how we can help, how we can.
Mask off when you're talking on the microphone.
I'm seeing many people asking how to help, what we can do to help these people. So actually, I want to share with you, we have a real case in our church right now. It's a Cuban man. He's 32 years old, and he got here in the United States, how many days ago, Kathy? 12 days ago, 15 days ago, about 2 weeks. And he has 90 days to present himself to the immigration, and he has an I-94, the form I-94. So he's trying to do the legal thing, trying to get a job, to get a permission to work. But the immigration is closed right now because of the COVID. We went with him to Indy. We were there, so we tried to call. I emailed the people, so they said, just wait for the appointment. I will send you to your address. And he's living in a trailer with 3-4 families all together. And he's trying to raise money and work and get the better situation for his family in Cuba. So if you want to help, if you know some lawyer that can help us, talk with me or Kat Lampton, we can work with him. He's waiting, he's desperate, waiting for the time to receive the appointment, but he doesn't receive anything so far.
I didn't hear how old he was.
32 years old, yes.
And he also was in Mexico for over a year.
Because of the COVID.
Came from Cuba to Mexico and was stuck until
2
was
years
able.
in Mexico.
2 years in Mexico.
Waiting to cross.
On one of the border towns, and he said it was very, very dangerous for him. He's a very dark Cuban, so he doesn't fit in well in Mexico, and so he would stand out as an additional.
He told us when we were traveling with him to India, he said the situation there, it's so hard. He knows that it's danger to cross the border to come here, but he said, I prefer to die instead live that life and see my mom and dad and my sisters in that situation. So he's here in Columbus, Indiana, trying to get the documentation.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if anybody knows about the organization called Unbound, where you sponsor a child or a teenager, their education, and that way they are able to support themselves and help other people as well. And you can request someone from Guatemala or Honduras if you wish. So that's an individual thing.
Right. Elaine's talking about the Unbound program, which is a sponsorship program where you can sponsor a child from Guatemala or Honduras or Central America, all around the world, and then help support them for their education so that they can have.
It's similar to what we do in Haiti.
Similar to what we do in Haiti, yes, that's true. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say, Unbound also sponsors their sponsors for the elderly, not just for the children and for.
So Unbound offers sponsorships for elderly. I did not know that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I should sign up. Yes, ma'am.
We had 2 little boys.
That's probably over a year.
And now they're freshmen in college.
Okay, so you've sponsored somebody from when they were 2 years old until a freshman in college. Okay, that brings a smile to your face. You have helped them become a better person or given them the opportunities. Terrific. Anna.
I was just thinking how I'm going to say this. First of all, it is a blessing. I am immigrant. I migrated so many years ago. First thing I looked, it was a church. Because I knew at church I will feel welcome. At church, I will not miss my country so much. At church, I will find my place, my family. And it is. And just Mr. Sosa will not let me lie. I work with these people as a daily basis. People that came from Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, El Salvador, right? Yeah. And all of them, they don't really want to come to US. They need to come to US because it is so dangerous. It is on their country. There's so much need. And I had families that told me, whatever happened here in US is better than what should happen back in my country. So it's worth it to take the risk. So by hearing you guys, you guys willing to do something for them, it is a blessing. It takes a village, yes, it is. But also, we can start just to get involved, little by little, get interest on them, educate them about how they live, why they are here, and how I can help them. This is how we are called as a Catholics. to look each other humbly, kindly, and most of all, treat each other as the way we want to be treated, and make the difference on their lives. That's what I want to say more, but I'm going to get emotional then. But it is a big blessing to hear you guys and how you guys want to help and get involved. You guys will know every single help is a lot for them. I know that by experience. Right, Mr. Sosa?
Thank you, Anna. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
This is a difficult question. I noticed, I wanted to ask you if there was racial discrimination at the border, because I noticed the ones that made it were Spanish looking, etc. The Guatemalans, they're all Indians, because I visited those villages.
So was there racial
houses
issues
along the river.
Yeah.
I did not, and they, I would think it's, the gangs can't get anything out of them.
Yeah.
I would think it's economic reasons. And as I say, they didn't make it. That's why I asked about
The question was, did we see racial issues at the border? Not so much. I mean, I did not, the people that were being turned away were not any different. It was all Latinos, so Mexican, Guatemalan, Honduras. The majority of the people we ran into were Guatemalan and Honduran.
yeah.
But, so I did not see really any racial at that level anyway, at least with our experience of it. Father Clem.
I was surprised not to hear something of people who spoke languages other than Spanish, particularly from Guatemala, where they have large Indian populations that have different languages, such as the Chu. Many
Right.
of them lived in Seymour. Did you not run into that?
The question is, did we run into anybody who spoke the indigenous languages from Central America? We did not, interestingly. They may have spoken them in addition, but everybody we ran into spoke Spanish, at least enough to function. So we did not see that.
language.
Thank you all for your questions. Anything else? Let me do my. We close with this prayer for immigrants. Again, thank you all for joining us online. Who is there? Sounds like there's quite a number out there. Thank you for Kathy and Connie and Karen for setting up this beautiful little reception. Great. Merciful God, we pray to you for all the men, women, and children who have died after leaving their homelands in search of a better life. Though many of their graves bear no name, to you each one is known, loved, and cherished. May we never forget them, but honor their sacrifice with deeds more than words. We entrust you to all those who have made this journey, enduring fear, uncertainty, and humiliation, in order to reach a place of safety and hope. Just as you never abandoned your son as he was brought to a safe place by Mary and Joseph, so now be close to these, your sons and daughters, through our tenderness and protection. In caring for them, may we seek a world where none are forced to leave their home and where all can live in freedom, dignity, and peace. Merciful God and Father of all, wake us from the slumber of indifference, open our eyes to their suffering, and free us from the insensitivity born of worldly comfort and self-centeredness. Inspire us as nations, communities, and individuals to see that those who come to our shores are our brothers and sisters. May we share with them the blessings we have received from your hand and recognize that together as one human family, we are all migrants, journeying in hope to you, our true home, where every tear will be wiped away, where we will be at peace and safe in your embrace. Amen. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for being here this evening.